So the Star Wars proprietary narrative dice. They don't have numbers, it's just a bunch of symbols. What does any of this mean? What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Nate, I'm the GM here at Tabletop Empire, and this is video 2 of our series to go through the entire core rulebook section by section, through every single chapter, explaining it so that way we can make it easy for you and you can understand the rules for your games at home. Today we're at chapter 1.2, that is the Star Wars dice and how do they work. So without further ado, let's just hop on straight into our main subject, the dice. You probably saw this giant mess over here and wondering, how do I use these dice? When do I use these dice? Why do they have symbols instead of numbers? Now those are all very good questions and we're going to answer all of them today. So let's do it. So in every tabletop RPG, you're going to do what's called a check, where it's the player checking to see if they're able to do something. Now if you look at your character sheet, you should see a bunch of different skills listed, and there's a wide range with everything from athletics to vigilance to stealth to using a blaster to using a lightsaber and knowledge of various things you might have knowledge about. So as you're playing the game, let's say you want to take some sort of action. You tell your GM you want to take this action and he says, oh, that requires a roll. Maybe you say, hey, I want to try to sneak up behind the stormtrooper. The GM will say, okay, make a stealth roll. It's at this point that you would grab your handful of dice and you would throw them. But how many do you throw and what are all these different colors? So let's talk about all the different dice and what they mean. So we have the white die. This is called the Force die. And this is primarily used when your Jedi players want to use a Force ability, such as move or influence, you know. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Later on, when players level up, they can use their skill tree to get more Force die, to use more powerful abilities, etc. I'm gonna get into that when we get into the Force, because that's a whole video. Next up, we have the yellow proficiency die and the green ability die. These are the dice that represent how good you are at something. Then you have your red challenge and your purple difficulty die. These are kind of the opposite of the yellow and green. They're going to represent how hard a check will be to accomplish. In other tabletop RPGs, such as Dungeons and Dragons, the GM's going to have a number in their head that you roll a d20 against. And then let's say the number he's thinking of is 17. If you roll a 17 or higher, you pass the check. Well, in this one, you actually get to see the difficulty you're up against, and we're going to explain this too. Last but not least, we have the boost die and the setback die. Now the boost die is the blue one. These slightly boost your chances to succeed at a roll. You can gain them from either narrative reasons that you might have an advantage, maybe a skill tree or racial bonus gets you a boost die when you do specific rolls. And then we have the black setback dice. This slightly sets back your chances of success. These are typically used when there's a narrative reason why that check might be harder. Maybe that stormtrooper's hiding behind cover, so you add 2 setback dice. Maybe you have some sort of critical injury that says, hey, take a setback dice for the rest of this encounter. And if you have the box of dice, you may have seen these little round circle tokens. Those are called destiny points, and that is actually next week's video. So hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, so we know what these dice are, but what about the symbols on them? So the circles on the Force die, these are your Force points. Now the yellow, green, and blue dice, these all have good symbols on them, and the purple, red, and black dice all have bad symbols on them. We have the explosion symbol. This means a success, and the more you have, the more successful you are at a task. Maybe you deal more damage on the attack, or maybe you heal more in the medicine check. Maybe you get to ask an extra question from the NPC that you're coercing or charming for more information. Now the opposite of this explosion symbol is going to be the failure symbol, this triangle here. These failures cancel out success. So for every 1 success and 1 failure, you have nothing left over. There's no difference to 4 fails, 4,000 fails, or 0 fails and 0 successes. That's all just a failed check. Okay, next we have this Jedi-like symbol. These are advantages. Maybe you recover mental strain. Maybe a party member gets to add a boost die to the next roll. Maybe you get to suggest to the GM how you want to use your advantage. Yep, that is something you can do in this game with GM oversight. Okay, and the counter to the advantage symbol is this empire-looking symbol that is threat. Though I end up calling it disadvantage more often, even though it's technically threat, but tomato tomato. These will do things like add mental strain, maybe unintentionally assist an enemy, or maybe there's a complication with whatever task you're trying to do and it just takes longer. You know, things that don't make you fail at the task you were doing, but have some either minor or major setbacks depending on how many you roll. Now, advantage and threat does not affect your success, and that's what's really cool about these narrative dice. Because maybe you can succeed with 3 successes, but you have 2 disadvantage. Oh, I called it disadvantage again, threat. Or maybe you don't succeed at the roll, but you do have a couple extra advantages that you can use to help your teammate. Now there's actually 2 more symbols to get into for the dice. These are only found on the yellow and red dice respectively. The good version is the triumph. This is on the yellow dice. And this one is the despair. This is on the red dice. Both of these have 2 parts to the symbol. Now the first part is each one has a success or a failure respectively for, triumph, despair. These can be canceled out as usual. You just calculate it with the rest of your dice roll. Now the second part, that's the cool part, and in other games it can best be compared to like a nat 20 or a nat 1. It's a mega sized advantage or threat that either has much greater or much worse outcomes. These cannot cancel each other out, so if you roll both, you have to have a big good thing to happen as well as a big negative thing to happen. So maybe you roll a despair and an extra small group of stormtroopers shows up to the fight, slightly turning the odds into their favor. Maybe one of these stormtroopers is more than just kind of like your minion class enemy, and is actually an adversary. You can use that triumph to shoot him and get a critical injury on him, so that way he's much less of a threat. And just like your advantages, the GM and the player get to work together to decide how they want to spend their triumph. If you guys are still here and you found this helpful, be sure to hit like, hit subscribe. There's a new video every single week. If you leave a comment down below asking me a question, I respond to every single person. So yeah, hit a comment and leave a comment and hit like. It's free, it helps the channel. I appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, so we know what the dice are, we know what the symbols are, but how many do I roll? For this example, let's use an athletics check. Maybe you're trying to climb up the side of a building. So first, you would look at your skill on your character sheet that says athletics, and you can see the characteristic that ties to it. That would be your brawn or strength. Let's say you have 1 rank into athletics and you have 3 rank into brawn. So you roll a total of 3 green dice, right? And the 1 rank in athletics upgrades a green die into a yellow die, which has a higher chance of success. And it's as easy as that. Which number between your characteristic and your skill is higher, that's how many green dice you roll. Which number is lower, that's how many get upgraded into yellow. So the GM and your abilities will determine how many boost die or setback dice you roll. Maybe you have abilities that give you boost die, or maybe you have abilities that take away setback dice. Both are a thing and are great. Now the GM will set the difficulty for what to roll against, and you'll be mostly rolling against purple, but the upgraded purple is the red, just like the green and the yellow. So let's start with 0. That is the simple difficulty. It's a task that you shouldn't really ever fail unless there is a setback that would prevent you from completing it. So in that case, you just roll 0 purple dice and however many setback dice the GM tells you. We have 1, which is easy, which is, you have a chance of failing, but the chances of failing are still pretty hard. Then we have 2, which is an average skill check, where maybe the average person who hasn't really put any points into that skill may actually not pass. They might, but they might not. But anybody who has points into a skill probably shouldn't fail these rolls, though it sometimes happens. That's the dice. You have 3, and these are your hard tasks. These are ones where if you don't have points into this skill, you're probably not going to pass at this point. However, there's still a pretty good chance you'll pass if you're talented in that skill. So 4 difficulty dice, this is your daunting tasks. These are going to be your tasks that are actually pretty hard. So maybe you're trying to find food in the middle of a desert. Maybe you're trying to perform a surgery. And then we have 5, which is formidable. These are going to be the tasks that are going to be near impossible, but still doable. And depending on how hard the check is, the GM will tell the players, and then you take your big handful of dice and you throw them down. It's at that point you'll start canceling out your success and failures, your advantages and threats, and see what you have left over, as well as see if you have any triumphs or despairs. So let's do 1 or 2 examples for how to use these in narrative play. So for our first example, let's say you're in a fight with a band of bounty hunters. Now you're taking a shot at this bounty hunter with your blaster pistol. So you would take your 4 dice from your 4 agility, then you would upgrade 2 of them to yellow because you have 2 points into ranged light. Maybe you have a skill in your talent tree that lets you add a boost die to ranged light checks. Maybe your teammate failed their last check, but they had 2 advantages, so the GM gives you another boost die. The bounty hunter is within medium range, that's going to be 2 purple dice. We'll get into combat and how many dice per distance and all that stuff in the combat chapter, but this is the dice for this roll. You pick them all up and you throw them down. Maybe another example is you're trying to climb the side of a building and you have 3 brawn, so 3 green dice, but you have 2 points into athletics, so you upgrade 2 of those green dice into yellow die. Maybe this wall doesn't really have any great spots to hold on to, and it's about 15 feet off the ground. So we're gonna make this a hard check. This is not an easy feat. 3 purple dice. However, there's some leftover junk beside the building that you notice and you tell the GM, hey, I want to stack that up and climb on top of it. So he can add 2 boost die to that roll. Maybe somebody recently just washed the side of the building and it's wet, so it's going to be a little bit slippery, so add 1 setback dice. Again, pick up your dice, roll them down, cancel out all the symbols, see what you have left. So you'll hear a lot when you're reading through the rulebook about upgrading rolls. So for upgrading, that means a green will turn into a yellow if you have a green available. Upgrading the difficulty upgrades from purple to red. If there are no more purple or green dice to upgrade, you can then add an additional purple or green die instead. Unless you have another upgrade after that, then that die you just added will then itself get upgraded to yellow or red. Now for downgrading rolls, this is where your yellow turns into a green or your red turns back down into a purple. And let's say all of the dice are already purple, nothing happens. Or if all of your dice are already green, you can't lose dice on rolls. You can only downgrade them from yellow to green or red to purple. Now, outside of doing your typical skill checks, there are a couple other ones that you can maybe come across in your game. So the first kind of check is the opposed check. This is when an action that your player is doing directly opposes somebody else, or maybe you're trying to do something without another person noticing. So let's say you're trying to charm a guard. You're trying to flatter him, get on his good side. So you would roll your charm roll, which would, in this case, let's see, 3 presence, 2 charm, that's 2 yellow and a green. However, that guard has 2 points in willpower and 1 upgrade into discipline. So you're gonna have to roll against 1 purple and 1 red. Next, we have competitive checks. This is when you are competing with another player character. The book goes into example about the players together are trying to do a drinking contest. So the GM will set the difficulty to like a 3, and then the players will roll both against the 3 difficulty, and whoever has the most successes wins. However, maybe the player that lost had more advantages, so something cool gets to happen there. And last but not least, we have assisted checks. This is when you are trying to assist another player character in whatever task that they are doing. This breaks down into 2 kinds of assistance. You have your skilled assistance and your unskilled assistance. So skilled assistance is when you actually have the stats to be able to help your fellow party member. Let's say player 1 is a Wookiee with 5 brawn and 1 rank into athletics. Player 2, that's you, you're a human with 2 brawn and 3 ranks into athletics. Now, the Wookiee wants to climb onto a tall roof and the human, you, want to assist. You would take the highest stats from each, assuming it's helpful. In this case, we get 5 dice from the Wookiee's brawn and 3 upgrade from your athletics, since your athletics is higher than his. Unskilled assistance is when you don't have anything that you can help with. Maybe you also only had 1 rank in athletics and your brawn is lower. Nothing you can provide for that Wookiee. However, you can still attempt to give him a helping hand and he can add a boost die to his roll. So unskilled assistance, 1 boost die. Now there's generally restrictions when it comes to assisting other players, such as typically only 1 player can assist at a time unless specific circumstances might allow for more. GM will determine that. The GM may add more conditions why you maybe can't assist. Maybe there's not enough space for you to actually get in there and help the Wookiee up. Or maybe you're on the other side of that field. You can't help him up the building. And then there's some special rules around combat and assisting, but we're going to get to that in chapter 6. I mentioned something earlier and I kind of want to touch back on it, and that is that the player characters can give input on the advantages and triumphs that they roll. They get to collaborate with the GM to say what their dice roll means. It's not just the GM saying, oh, recover 2 mental strain, or maybe your teammate gets a boost I added their next roll. No, if you have an idea for how that advantage can help you, and it lies well within the amount of advantages that you rolled, suggest it to your DM. You're able to provide input. That's just one of the coolest things about this dice system, in my opinion. So when people see these weird dice that aren't normal, it typically kind of scares them away from the Star Wars RPG system. However, I'm going to give you guys the reasons why I personally love them way more than the D20 system. The first one is, as a player, you know what you're up against. I don't like in D&D that the GM has some arbitrary number and you have to try to roll against it, and you don't really know what it is until after you roll, and even then, you may never find out. I really enjoy that. Oh, okay, I see that I have, you know, my 2 green and 2 yellow, and I'm against 3 purple. I can still fail this roll, but I'm probably not, and I can see my odds in front of me and then roll it. And that's the second point I like. You get to roll a big handful of dice, and that's just so much fun. More dice equals more funds, even if finding the outcome takes just a little bit longer than a single D20. I also really like how these dice have a narrative focus, and it better adds to the story. The Star Wars RPG system is all based around its narrative ability, and it's all about the story, and that's fantastic, and the dice do wonders helping that. Did I hit everything? Did I explain it all away? Does that all make sense? Leave a comment down below, ask me any questions. If you need any clarification or anything, I'm happy to help. I will respond to every single comment. If you found this helpful, please hit like. It's free. It helps the channel out a lot since we're just starting out here. And subscribe. We do this every single week. Next week we're going to talk about destiny points, and that'll be the last video for chapter 1, and then we can get into character creation chapter 2. That's going to be a lot of fun. Okay guys, this was great. I'll see you guys next week. Until then, may the force be with you. Peace.